For decades, the fitness world has told us that pushing for a higher and higher VO2 max is a golden ticket to health and a longer life. Today, we're going to put that idea under the microscope and see what our own physiology has to say about it.
This is the central idea we're going to explore. What if, from a purely biological standpoint, an elite aerobic capacity isn't some prize to be held onto, but actually a costly burden that your system is actively trying to get rid of?
So to really get to the bottom of this, we first have to understand the prevailing belief, the dogma really. The idea that has taken hold is that maximizing your aerobic engine through tons of training volume is the same thing as optimizing your health. Now, this whole belief system isn't built on nothing. There's a solid foundation in observational data. You look at large groups of people, and yes, there's a clear pattern. Folks with higher aerobic capacity tend to live longer, healthier lives. And that correlation has been taken as a direct prescription. Go do a lot of endurance training.
And this is where we have to pause and ask the right question. The data shows that the marker is valuable. Having a good aerobic capacity is great. But what it doesn't do is prove that the common method for chasing that marker to its absolute extreme, chronic high-volume training, is the best or even a safe way to get there.
The most powerful piece of evidence against that high-volume approach doesn't come from some new study. It actually comes from watching how your own body behaves. Physiology itself gives a really clear verdict here.
The fact is, a peak VO2 max is incredibly fragile. Take just a couple of weeks off from that high-volume training, and your body starts to actively tear down the complex machinery it built. A month off, and you've lost serious ground. And after just 3 months, that hard-won adaptation is almost entirely gone. And what's really telling is when you compare this to other adaptations. You build strength or increase bone density, and those changes stick around for a long, long time, even after you stop the training. The rapid disappearance of VO2 max is different. It's a unique and deliberate process. Your body is urgently trying to get back to its baseline.
So we have to stop looking at this as some kind of training failure. It's not. It's biological information. Your body is sending a very clear message. Maintaining this massive aerobic engine is just too expensive from a metabolic standpoint, and it's not good for its long-term health.
Okay, so why does the body fight back so hard? The answer is in the systemic costs, the price your whole body pays to build and then maintain that artificially high aerobic capacity. It basically creates a state of internal metabolic warfare. You can see the chain of events here. First, you use high-volume training to force your body to build this huge, energy-guzzling aerobic engine. As a protective measure, your body's response is to lower its overall baseline metabolism to save energy. This then triggers a hormonal shift into what you could call a resource conservation mode, and that's what leads directly to a whole cascade of negative health consequences. And these consequences are pretty serious. We're talking about chronically elevated cortisol, that stress hormone. This resource conservation mode makes it incredibly difficult to build or even just hold on to metabolically expensive tissue like muscle. You see this all the time in elite endurance athletes. That upper body atrophy isn't an accident. It's a direct metabolic trade-off. The body is literally breaking down other tissues to fuel the primary activity.
And even the cardiovascular system, which we assume is the main beneficiary, can pay a steep price. High-volume endurance training is linked to higher rates of atrial fibrillation and even calcification of the arteries. That super low resting heart rate that's often celebrated, it can actually become pathologically slow. These aren't just rare events. They are well-documented risks of this specific training method.
But what if there was another way, a different mechanism that can give you those positive cardiovascular adaptations without all the systemic cost? Well, there is, and the key is a mechanical process called shear forces. So what is shear force? It's basically the friction and pressure that's put on the inner walls of your arteries as blood rushes through them. When you get a high velocity of blood flow, it creates this powerful mechanical signal that tells the arterial walls to get healthier, to become more elastic and more responsive. So now we can compare two different ways to stimulate the cardiovascular system. You have long, steady-state endurance work, which produces pretty low and steady shear forces, but at a huge metabolic and hormonal cost. And then you have brief, intense efforts. These generate really powerful, high-peak shear forces, but with a tiny fraction of the systemic cost. The conclusion from understanding this mechanism is really direct. Intensity,
not duration, is what's really driving the beneficial stimulus for your vascular health. You can get a much better adaptive signal in a fraction of the time, and you get to skip all those destructive side effects.
And how do you generate these high peak shear forces? Through anything that causes a rapid spike in your heart rate and blood output. We're talking about things like sprint intervals, high-intensity interval training, heavy resistance training, and even explosive movements like plyometrics. These all provide the signal without the chronic stress. Now, all of this analysis hinges on making a really important distinction, and that's the difference between training for elite-level competitive performance and training for general health and longevity. Look, for an elite athlete whose job it is to win races, accepting all those brutal physiological trade-offs, well, it's a rational choice. Performance is the only goal. But for the average person, whose goal is simply to be healthy and live a long time, forcing your body to make those same trade-offs is just counterproductive. The costs simply outweigh the benefits. This really says it all. That feeling you get after a long run, that neurochemical high, it isn't free. The payment is made with chronic stress hormones, a higher risk of arterial calcification, a suppressed metabolism, and building an adaptation that your body starts fighting to undo the second you stop. The alternative path is much more direct and efficient. You use brief, intense workouts to generate the primary stimulus for cardiovascular health, those shear forces, while also doing strength work to maintain your essential muscle mass. You get the good adaptations and you skip the metabolic warfare. And that brings us back to where we started. Your body's rapid dismantling of peak aerobic fitness, that's a design feature, not a bug in your program. It is a clear signal that the adaptation is just too costly. And that's biological information we really ought to respect. Ultimately, the best training advice you can ever get comes from your own biology. By confusing what it takes to be an elite performer with what it takes to be optimally healthy, a lot of people are just ignoring the clear feedback their own bodies are giving them. So the real question is, are you prepared to listen?